I have been at this a while, and I thought about what am I going to talk to this group about without having them completely glaze over. And then the more I thought about it, the more I thought there are some really great things going on in technology that are helping us to become more efficient and greener as businesses. So there is the technology that drives green, and then there's also something that you may be hearing more and more about, the green that drives technology as well. And I'm going to tell a little bit about both of those stories. But the reality is human civilization, I mean, since we began to aggregate in cities and kind of create some of this mess that we're trying to solve now as the corporate eco-forum and a lot of the green initiatives out there, networks have always been fundamental to how that worked. From the very first villages that were about the marketplace and the ox carts that went through the hub and spoke network to get to that trading exchange and then back out to the endpoints, to the beginning of the development of the Silk Roads in China and the spice roads in India and the Peloponnesian shipping lanes and the Roman roads and the clipper ships. And you can kind of follow that chain all the way to the big modern metropolises and aerotropolises today that are just super network connected. They have airports, they have roads, they have rail, they have rivers or ports that make those connections work. And that's been a big part of the thriving world that we live in right now. It's what creates commerce, it's what creates community, and without those networks, you can't really function in a community like that. But here in the modern era, it's been about the tale of two networks. Not just that physical network that connects us all and allows us to get goods delivered into the right marketplaces or into our marketplace, but the digital networks that overlay those physical networks that give us visibility to what's going on out there. So what I'd like to talk about is how those digital networks create significant efficiencies and advantages that drive for greener and cleaner and more efficient and productive systems. Without the information overlays that allow us to monitor the vehicles, monitor the aircrafts, efficiently create the loads and the density, route effectively across all of the stops that we have to make. When you think about it, these systems, they do burn a lot of fuel, and I'm not, trying to greenwash that in any way, but in a lot of ways, they're like carpooling. What we do is we aggregate a lot of stuff, and then we very efficiently move it from point to point, and then we very efficiently take it out on a carpool route or on a bus route where we're dropping things off. And a lot of that bypasses enormous numbers of collection points, distribution points, and tiers of distribution that existed in the past. And this all happens because of information systems that allow us to very discreetly, very accurately, and very effectively move stuff from, a lot of times, the point of manufacture to the point of consumption. So it doesn't sit around in warehouses in between, it doesn't stop. And also, we all love retail. Retail is a big part of our lives, but retail may not be the cleanest way to get things. We talk about these delivery systems as being significant carbon producers, and they are, but what about that car trip up to the store and back again and back and back? And when I look at the way my household works, that's not a very efficient system. But when I see the route vehicles come through the neighborhood and know that they're on a mission to deliver stop density and route density, those are two economic metrics for our business that says the closer we can make those stops to each other and the denser we can make the delivery component inside those stops, the more efficient they are. So we're constantly thinking about efficiency because the economics of that go very well with the green efficient parts of it. So a long time ago, there was something that popped into my head that I call the Theory of Non Relativity, and I wrote about it in Information Week. I'm sure you all read Information Week, right? It's one of the great trade. Some of my CIO friends do, in fact, read Information Week, but I called it the Theory of Non Relativity, and it occurred to me as we looked out at this tale of two networks, that there was this world that we lived in that was defined by atoms, by physical stuff that you could touch and feel and see, and inventory was what you could count stacked up in a building. But there was this rapidly emerging thing that actually wasn't subjected much to the laws of physics and relativity, and that was the bits. And the theory of non-relativity went like this. It said opportunity is equal to bits over atoms, B over A. And the opportunity is, as we apply more and more bits, more and more information to the physical world that we live in, we have this incredible opportunity to optimize it, to see into it, to find ways to really drive new efficiencies and to do things that are smarter for the planet, smarter for our businesses, and you know, we think that those things are really important. The technology that's at work today, though, is also very important. There are so many things in our networks now that are more and more efficient, whether it's new, more fuel-efficient aircraft. We still need airplanes in this world, and so it's really important to put modern gauge aircraft in there that burn, you know, 40, 50% less fuel than some of the older aircraft. New clean diesel technology. It may be arguable that there's no such thing as clean diesel, but these systems are much, much cleaner. I mean, I drive a turbo diesel car that is so efficient and so clean, gets such great mileage, and I could probably do better with an electric vehicle, but I know I couldn't do better with a petroleum vehicle. I mean, it's just a very efficient vehicle. So we look for ways to drive technologies that make it better. You know, don't make it great, and you know, we have to continue to figure out where that edge is. But in California, we just deployed our first all-electric station. The pickup and delivery capabilities out of that facility are all now electric vehicles that are moving out there. And we find that a lot of our route vehicles are very capable of being electrified. So the EV components in our network are growing rapidly, and we find that to be a very efficient way to do pickup and delivery systems. The line haul systems, the long routes that we run and that UPS runs, are really very point-to-point systems. So we can very efficiently begin to put in liquid natural gas fueling stations. We're both doing it out in the western part of the United States, where we're beginning to buy new engines that are very, very efficient, that run on liquid natural gas and run long-haul routes significantly more efficiently than some of the vehicles that we've had in our fleets over the past. And you know, the other thing about how technology is driving green is in fact in the world of technology itself. We have a new data center in Colorado Springs, which my pager's been blowing up all day because there are wildfires out there in that area, and so we all need to have them in our place. It's really a tough situation with the fires in the West right now, but the data center is safe, but the data center is a LEED Gold certified facility, and the reason that it is because of not only how it was built, but where it was built. It uses the dry, cool air in Colorado to drive very efficient cooling systems. We've also modernized the application base that's going in there, so it runs on these highly virtualized pods of servers. So instead of the technology of the past where, you know, applications ran pretty inefficiently on their own stacks of hardware, purple ones and silver ones and black ones, if you look at old data centers, the new data centers at Google and at Amazon and at FedEx and everywhere, you know, have very consistent technology laid out in very dense arrays where you're getting high utilization of that hardware. And believe me, data centers burn a lot of energy. It's just one of the characteristics of the modern world that we all need to be aware of, is that all this information creates great value in our lives, but it does come at a cost, and we all have to be very conscientious about how we do that. I know we'll talk more about some of this in our sit-down Q&A session up here, but I just kind of wanted to warm you up with some thoughts about how technology drives efficiency and how efficiency is being built into the technologies that we're running today.
Okay, so next up we have another executive who I've known for a long time, Tony Scott. Tony used to be the CTO at General Motors, and then he went over to the Walt Disney Company for a few years, And for the past 5 years, we were just talking, for the past 5 years, he's been the CIO at Microsoft. So Tony?
Thanks, Emmer. I think CIO, to Rob's point, used to stand for career is over. And I hope to, hit your track record. It's an enviable sort of reign at one of the great companies. I have known MR for a long time, and I want to say first, congratulations on what I think is one of the best gatherings. We were here 5 years ago when you and PJ started this, and it's been wonderful to see this grow and turn into a great conversation and idea-generating thing every year. One of the things I thought I would talk about is, and I'll do this in a very deliberate way, I won't talk about a Microsoft product at all in my speech. What I thought I'd really focus on is some trends I think in our industry, some of which we participate in, but that I think really do start to change things for the better. The first one is the cloud, and raise your hand if you've been clouded to death. I know I have. But I think there's some subtle implications for the cloud that maybe we're just beginning to understand and that are not fully explored yet. And so I think we all get that this is a potential to be more efficient in the use of compute resources. I think we all get the picture that this could be a solve to some of the scale problems that have plagued most companies. And certainly, I think there are great examples of all of those things that are happening today. For me, it's the end. I think I'll see the end of this by the time I retire, and it's the end of what I call the double-double rule. Rob created his theory of non-relativity. Mine is the double-double rule. So I started in life, doing systems work, putting up servers and, putting applications on them and all that sort of stuff. And when I started, I and my colleagues unofficially followed the double-double rule. Here's the double-double rule. You figure out how much resource a particular application is going to take. You double it, and you double it again. And if you're good, when you put this application into production, what you see is 10 to 20% CPU utilization and resource utilization. And you do that because you plan for growth, you plan for peak volumes, you plan for all that sort of stuff. And this is what keeps you from getting a call in the middle of the night that the server's crashed or whatever it happens to be. And it's never taught in school, but somehow subconsciously systems engineers, people who put the computers together, the systems that run your company and run practically everything we do, have unconsciously followed the double-double rule. With server virtualization that came along a few years ago, we started to move in on that a little bit, and in some cases we just started following the double rule. Got rid of double-double, and now there's the double rule. And if you talk to the systems engineers in any company and you ask them when do they start to get nervous about utilization of the stuff in their data center, you can see that they're still probably following the double rule. And this is the promise of the cloud, because the engineers that work in the cloud don't have a double-double rule and they don't have a double rule. They have a rule that looks something more like 80%, 90% utilization. And we know because of Moore's law that the efficiency, that if you take one unit of measure of compute efficiency, it's gone up every year Every 18 months it doubles. But it also means that the cost has gone in half every 18 months. And when you combine the end of the double-double rule with Moore's law and both the energy costs and the physical cost of compute, what you see is tremendous potential in the cloud. So that's trend one, and I think we should pay close attention to that. I've set a goal in our company to have 80% of our applications that were nowhere in the cloud a few years ago, 80% will be in the cloud by the end of 2015. That's taking all of our legacy stuff and moving it there en masse, and we'll follow not the double rule and not the double-double rule, but something that looks more like that 80 to 90%. The second thing I want to talk about is the set of connected things that will come together. Somebody said years ago that anything that could be connected to the internet will be. And I think it was Bill Gates maybe that said that. And we certainly see that playing out. Anything that you buy that's plugged in or that has the capability to connect to the internet likely will do so and will likely produce information that can be useful for a whole wide variety of reasons, not just for energy consumption reasons or sustainability reasons. But I think that part is very exciting. I think the world of smart devices and smart cloud is where the promise of the future really is. It's not just connected vehicles, it's not just cell phones or tablets or PCs or smart electric meters, it's smart everything. And I'll give you just a couple of examples of ways I see this playing out that I think are kind of important. One is this notion of the connected devices all talking to one another, acting on your behalf. Today it requires way too much deliberate action for the devices that you have, that you carry around with you or that are in your home or in your office. It requires way too much work to get them to act on your behalf. Because fundamentally they're not well connected together in some sort of a mesh that knows about you, knows about your preferences, and in this case, since this is the topic, coordinate energy usage on your behalf. As an example, I have a highly automated home. There's lots of things that I can do both remotely and with sensors and so on to control the energy usage in my home. But I still have to take action. I have to press a button, I have to do something to make all of that take place. Or I can run an automated schedule, which is great if I have a schedule. If I don't have a schedule, it's not very useful. But you ask the question, why can't my home know that I'm driving home? And use that information to turn on the things that need to be turned on at the appropriate time. Or if I leave, why doesn't the web of things that I carry around with me and that I interact with, why doesn't it know that I'm leaving and now it's time to turn things off? And it could be, you know, a whole wide set of things way beyond that simple example. But I see that day coming together as a reality, and maybe in some cases sooner than we think. One of the areas that we've invested a lot of R&D in is something called the natural user interface. Much of our interaction with computers has been through the mouse and through the keyboard. It's been through touch. It's been through voice more recently. But it needs to be about presence, about location and orientation and connecting the devices that we have with one another to do useful things on our behalf. And that's the future that I think will bring us not only greater sustainability, but use technology to service all kinds of needs as we go forward. The last thing I want to talk about is data. So obviously you have all of these devices that are generating a ton of information, most of which is thrown away. The most recent study I saw said that somewhere around 98% of the digital information that's generated every single day gets thrown away, never gets looked at, never gets used, never gets consumed by anybody or anything. It's just useless. I think of this in the same way I used to think about car emissions. When we started to focus on car emissions and efficiency, we started doing really interesting things. And you can argue that there's more progress to be made, but this is a great example where the application of technology has done wonderful things to reduce the emissions that happen from automobiles and from engines of all kinds. What if we applied that same set of smarts to data emissions? In this case, not necessarily to reduce it, but to use all of that data exhaust in more helpful ways. To take advantage of the information that we're producing and then use the intelligence and the smarts that can come from that to do things that are useful for humans and also for better sustainability reasons. And I think there's huge promise in that, and I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg of that. And if you want to talk more about that, come join our session this afternoon.
Okay, I'm going to ask both of you, Rob and Tony, to come on up. So one of the reasons that I didn't mention was both Rob and Tony are on our leadership council, and they're the IT executives, you know, in terms of just getting IT a big part of the sustainability movement. So let me start with the question, with the point that Tony ended up with, which was big data, this massive amount of data that gets created in every one of our member companies, right? And 98% of it is not even being looked at. So what are some of the ideas around utilizing that? Because every one of these companies, right, our members get asked by people to do reporting, and they get rated on it, and everyone has a different format and a different standard. So is there any help that IT can give in that function specifically? Because I think a lot of these members, and including probably some parts of your companies as well, are doing this on a manual basis, literally. Spreadsheets, maybe taking data from some systems. Or is there any work going on in that space?
Tons. How much time do you have?
Just give a couple examples. Or.
Well, I think, you know, if you think, you don't have to think very long, actually, to find some very interesting problems. So one of the things that we wanted to do was we wanted to understand more about printing and how much, you know, probably everybody sees this in your office. You go to the printer and there's a stack of things that somebody's printed and nobody's picked up, and you know, you go to a meeting and people print out their PowerPoints and you have the meeting, people take notes, and then, you know, three minutes later it's in the garbage can. So we wanted to understand more about people's printing behavior and what they're doing. And so I went to my staff and asked the question, and well, let's just say the answer wasn't what I was looking for. But we realized we have a ton of data that we could look at to understand more about printing, and very quickly we were able to grab the data and then start to play around with things that would help us modify the behavior. And so one of the things that we decided to do was instead of automatically printing out to a printer, you just have to go to the printer and put in your own personal PIN code, and then the print job shows up there at the printer while you're standing there. Reduced print volumes by a huge amount just by doing that. And we said, well, that was easy. And it came, but the insight came just from understanding, you know, more about our data. Just one simple example.
You know, one of the problems I have with the very term big data is that it focuses you on big,
Yeah.
And the reality of what big data brings is small outcomes. You know, I mean, there are things that kind of come out of that that are so useful in everyday life. My friend Rick Smolin, some of you may know Rick, did all the Day in the Life books, Blue Planet. He's doing a new project right now called and I can say this because it's already been on BBC and a few other things, but it's called The Human Face of Big Data. And what Rick is doing, he's kind of mobilizing all of these instances where your life becomes better because of all of this data that's out there. How can we kind of put it all in a shoebox in front of us and rummage around in it and know whether, mom has fallen in the apartment because she's wearing a Nike bracelet that, that can tell whether you're laying on the floor, or upright. And so, my whole point around big data is what's actually being discovered and unfurled in the big data thing are small outcomes. We use a lot of things in our networks that would drive very accurate visibility of a surgical kit moving through our networks that has a geo device in it, a sense-aware device that once it breaks a geo fence at the hospital location, the dashboards light up and say, this is here, or, moving Avastin, around for cancer patients and monitoring the temperature of it, things like that. Those are the, the human elements of how big data, affects small outcomes. And big data all by itself is just intimidating. It's sort of like the cloud. Yeah. It makes everybody go, when you say that, what do you mean? But all of those things are actually driving discrete outcomes for each of us that make our life better, that turn the power off in the house when you leave and things like that.
So the other thing is, you've both been at your companies for a while, and how do you work with other executives within the company in the area of sustainability? What's your role? How do you help them? How do they help you?
I'll go first this time and let you clean up on that. So for whatever reason, I think technology and sustainability have been pretty close fellows in our company. I mean, there's always been this technological element of, whether you were putting in solar arrays and you had to figure out how you're going to measure them to make sure that excuse me, to make sure that they're efficient, or whether, I meet someone in Silicon Valley. I met K.R. Sridhar out there who's doing Bloom Energy, the solid oxide cells, and, and several companies here in the room use Bloom and became charter members of that, including FedEx, because here's a great way to drive very efficient DC current local. It's almost like the cell phone analogy for electrical power, being applied to our facilities. So in Oakland, we have 500 kilowatts of sustained output from our Bloom cells out there. You could have this conversation in this room with them sitting over in the corner. They're so quiet. They're very, very efficient. And for things like data center applications, we're looking ahead, because one of the most inefficient things about electricity is that we take this AC current that we all deal with, and we convert it at the very end of its journey to direct current, because that's how most things run. That's what power supplies and PCs and computers do, is they basically invert that power to direct current. Well, the most efficient way to generate that is to use things like Bloom cells and drive DC straight into your data center, so you don't have to have these big power cleanser inverter things. So the reason that's an answer to your question is because I don't implement any of that. But as we find those things, I go to Mitch Jackson, our sustainability officer, or I go to our facilities people and I say, let's take a look at this. This might have merit. And, and maybe it has a little bit to do with my affinity with sustainability as well. But, I've ended up playing a pretty key role inside the company working on these initiatives.
I have the opposite story to tell, actually. This is, we actually work very closely with Rob Bernard, our Chief Sustainability Officer, and a lot of the folks across Microsoft. And our teams had collaborated on a big announcement we made a few months ago about making sure each of our business units paid the price for their carbon footprint. And we decided the right thing to do was to have our CFO and our COO go out and make the announcement and show that top management was bought in and all that sort of stuff. So we're really happy the day the announcement goes out. The next day, my staff starts pinging me about, you're getting some bad press, Tony. You're getting, you know, nailed by the press. What the hell? You know, how could this be? The writer, the headline was, the normally vocal Tony Scott doesn't have any fingerprints on this at all. He's radio silent on this subject. And I thought, boy, this is just antithetic. You know, it's the antithesis of everything I've worked hard for, which is to try to get people in the business to own all of this. Rob works hard on this every single day. And here's some reporter sort of figured out that because I wasn't quoted in the article, it must have been, you know, nothing to do with IT and so on. So I actually considered a Pyrrhic victory in some ways, but my staff didn't think it was like that. But I think, you know, on a broader level, I think the CIO role is really changing. And, you know, years ago, we didn't have a sustainability officer. The CIO relationship might have been with the CFO or might have been with the, you know, manufacturing guys. Today, because of the things Rob was talking about, everything going digital, our best friends are now some of these folks that we wouldn't have had a relationship with before. It's the chief marketing officer, you know, the sustainability officer, and so on. And it's an important part of, I think, the changing role.
And Mitch and I usually attend this conference together. This is the first one in a while he's missed, I think. So it's, you know, we spend time together at things like this and think about what's important.
Questions from the audience. I know you guys are probably wanting to figure out how to get your CIO involved or your IT executives. Any questions for Rob and Tony? Don't be shy. Oh, right here. Could we have a mic, please? Could hang on one second.
It's up over here.
Yeah, you want to shout it out
sure,
this time?
yeah, why don't you
we'll
shout
get the mic the
yeah.
next time.
I guess it's a question for Tony primarily, but you mentioned the potential of the cloud, but the cloud also seems like a tangible thing and it's like a free resource. So how do you encourage then, it has potential, but I also see the potential for abuse since, you know, similar to the tragedy of the commons. How do you encourage smart use of that resource then?
Well, let me talk about, this is going to be a very practical, tactical governance thing that we've done inside Microsoft. But, you know, I knew when I got the note from Steve Ballmer, who's, you know, he sent me a note saying, we've announced our cloud, you know, when are you going to have all the IT applications on the cloud? This was like 30 seconds after the announcement, you know. I thought, well, there could be a short answer to this, or maybe I better come up with a more thoughtful thing. And so got the team together, and we did put together a thoughtful response. We laid out a goal to be 80% by 2015. But then I thought, how am I going to move the business, my business counterparts there? And I have a range of business partners in Microsoft. I have everything from, you know, the guys that invent our products that are, you know, really technically smart and get all this stuff, to some folks who just, I want to show up, get my job done, and I'm really all about, you know, just getting my job done and reliability, and I don't really want to take chances with anything. So we put together a model that we call a pro forma invoice. And essentially what we do is we take all of our costs, the things that we spend money in IT on, and we divide it into two buckets. One bucket is all of those things that are way too hard to measure or too costly to measure, and my team just manages for efficiency and manages the demand side, if you will, as best we can. This is things like aggregate network bandwidth or aggregate storage, and we just divide by the number of heads in Microsoft, and every business unit gets charged for those things. I've taken the cost of those things down every year. On the other side of the pro forma invoice is IT spend that's directly related to a business activity. These are the specific applications for that business, the extra things that they require of IT to do. And 4 times a year, I sit down with each of the business units and we have a conversation around those direct costs. I show them the demand side stuff over here and what we're doing to be efficient, and they go, yeah, keep going. But on the stuff that runs their business, we have a conversation around what are the decisions that you and I can make together to change the profile of that cost. And one of them is going to the cloud. One of them is a sustainability discussion. And it changes the nature of the conversation from IT costs too much, which we all hear, no matter how good you are, to what are the things that you and I can actively do together? What are the decisions we can make to change the profile of what we have over on that side? And I found it to be a absolutely wonderful change. Now at the end, after you have this great conversation, they'll still say, I still think it costs too much. And I'm willing to accept that as the price for, you know, having this sort of better conversation. And when we did this sustainability announcement, that already was a part of the routine of that conversation. And for us, it's changed everything in terms of business engagement and sort of getting people into the room to have, you know, a different dialogue than we would have had before.
Just a little background on that, Tony. So you have an internal tax? Is that what this was? In a sense?
It's a full, yeah, it's a full accounting for their carbon footprint and the cost of that. Yeah, not just IT, their whole business model.
Got it.
So part of it is IT, part of it is other activities.
So Rob, how about you in this regard? I mean, what kind of conversations do you have with the business units, and how does sustainability play a role in any of these IT discussions?
So if you look at our world of private cloud implementations, so while we use Azure and we use some of the cloud services are out there, we're converting the existing footprint, which kind of followed the double-double rule at best, you know, back in the day. And so the sprawl of legacy technology in the business has a particularly inefficient footprint to it. It runs at very low utilization. It uses a lot of power. It takes up a lot of floor space with very intense cooling systems, all those kinds of things. If you look at the new footprint, the private cloud footprint, it runs about 80% more efficiently. It runs in less floor space with less power, denser footprints, so that the cooling systems and things like that, especially if you do them in Colorado and places like that, are very, very efficient. So there is an inherent efficiency in going to cloud resources, which are general purpose, generally available computing resources that can be applied to most compute problems. We're coming from a past where most compute was very specialized, had a real specific workload running on a real specific set of hardware, and that's inherently inefficient. I think if you took that out to the public cloud spaces, you'd find the same thing. It's almost like if we imagined electricity had never really been aggregated onto big networks with big power suppliers in the past. It would have been very inefficient for us all to run lots of generators, lots of things at local endpoints. The aggregation of that power and the visibility through the accounting systems and things like that have driven us all to become more and more efficient. That's not to say, I'm not trying to, you know, speak with a forked tongue. I think that things like Bloom energy and cell-based energy has a real important future to it. But, you know, history is all about centralization and decentralization. The big-time centralization of computing horsepower, you know, over this next couple of decades is going to save a lot of power, but it is also going to support the inexorable march of the information age. There's no stop, just like there was no stopping the electrical age, there's no stopping the information age. So let's do it as efficiently as we can in aggregated spaces that you know, portion out resource only as needed, rather than sitting there waiting for something to happen like a typical desktop does.
Great. Mike?
Rob and Tony, Mike Gugamas from Insight. For both Rob and Tony, what you've been discussing thus far is actually an evolution on the technological side that's going to occur, but both of you have brought up the business processes that are required to allow that to happen, particularly on the electric metering, right? So for electricity, how much is being used by whom, when? What activities are you involved in with your CFOs, COOs, and the other folks to actually modify those business processes to allow those migrations to occur?
Well, I've completely reorganized my IT organization around business process, actually, so that we could start measuring by business process the end-to-end cost from a whole bunch of different dimensions. If you had looked at the way we were structured before, our org chart mirrored the company org chart. And the company org chart reflects, you know, a way that we were doing business yesterday or today, but not the future of how we expect to do business. And so with Steve's permission, I reoriented us towards a business process-centric model that its goals are speed and customer satisfaction as the two sort of high-order bits. And the outputs of that will be far less cost, far less energy consumption, far less, you know, all of the things you would hope to get. We've seen some early results that are just phenomenal. 80–90% improvement in time, and, you know, significant reductions in cost. One of the things I forgot to mention about cloud is, in the old model, the double-double world that we used to follow, that was for the production environment. But we also had a test environment, we had a pre-production environment, we had a couple of sandboxes, and we would follow the same double-double rules there as well. So working on efficiency is not just a production issue, but it's also across all those other environments. When we move that same model to the cloud, I can shrink all of those other environments, even if I choose not to shrink the production environment to scale up and down, which we do. But even if I choose not to do that, I can still exercise that on those other 3 or 4 environments. And so the efficiencies that you get from that are just huge. It's way beyond the mental math you might have been doing around, you know, just eliminating the double-double rule. And we see that every single day. Now, when we apply business process to that and take steps out and improve the speed of the business process, it's just an accelerator on the numbers I gave you. And so I think this is the next really big revolution in what CIOs will work on and what others will work on leveraging the technology.
I'll answer it a little bit differently, and honestly, I think that the shift in our company is really more about the macro efficiency of the information technology it takes to run the business rather than micro accounting for the usage of that. So we believe, you know, I mean, and this goes back to the fact that we've never had a particularly rigorous chargeback system to the business for IT. It's always been strategic to us. Fred Smith said back in 1978, you know, when the company was pretty fledgling, the information about the package is as important as the package itself. So we've just got this culture of providing information to, you know, to the business to let them run. So my response to the greening of IT has been, let's get that footprint changed out. Let's modernize it. Let's drive it into these very, very efficient new infrastructure, smaller, better utilized and things like that. But then at the same time, you know, what we are doing at a very discrete level with each of the business units is using the theory of non-relativity. How can we apply more bits to the atoms that are at work out there? How can we drive more efficiency in the business by better route optimization, better fuel? You know, last thing you want to do is fuel an aircraft, for example, to fly fuel. You know, I mean, the loading of an aircraft is very, very important, but you want to fuel it optimally because you don't want to put too much fuel on it so that you're burning fuel to carry fuel. That's a bad plan. So a lot of technology, a lot of information about what's the load factor on that aircraft, how can you optimize it, and so those are application pieces of work rather than specifically accounting for the IT. And we think there's an enormous amount of potential that still exists out there, and having more efficient systems, better utilized networks, better utilized assets to drive a greener footprint.
Any other questions? One last one. Rob and Tony, there was an article recently that talked about how the CIO would implement, sustainability within a company, and it said embed it first within IT, which you folks have done. Second was embed it within the company, and then the final thing was embed it in your supply chain. Can you talk a little bit about the supply chain issues in sustainability and some of the solutions you guys are thinking of?
Well, I mean, that's our business at its core, is creating, I was talking with Scott from UPS earlier, and one of the advantages that we have in our businesses is that the more efficient we operate our business, the greener it is, and the more profitable it is at the same time. So we drive all of this work that has a multiple benefit. I mean, as we can create better load factors, as we can create more efficient routes, and we use technology to do all those things, we're driving a greener footprint, and we're also driving a more efficient company. We're one of those case studies where the economics of this are not, contradictory, in many cases to the effect that we all want to have here at CEF. Now we have, like they do, a big sandbox out there where we're deploying electric vehicles. We're putting in, sophisticated sensor technology into those things. We're monitoring, measuring everything we can to try and, experiment with new engines, new technologies, more efficient ways to run the network. We partner with the U.S. Postal Service because they have such dense route structures in our Smart Post products, and they're already making 140 million stops a day in the U.S. So we drive volume straight into the local delivery unit for the U.S. Postal Service, and they run that last mile route for us for a lot of volume every day now. So we're constantly looking for ways to experiment, to partner, to drive efficiency, and I believe that we are kind of lucky in that regard, because it's not, it doesn't pull apart the seams of the business. It actually makes the business better. If we can run, stop density, route density, and efficiency, fuel efficiency, we win, the environment wins, and our customers win.
I got lucky. One of the things I own in Microsoft, aside from some core IT stuff, is a function we call quality and business excellence. And these are a bunch of business process, Six Sigma, Think G quality kind of folks. And rather than a top-down model like some companies have, ours has always been more sort of meritocracy, bottoms up, come up, through the bottom. And so the team has existed for about 4 or 5 years now. And they've done a bunch of micro projects, I'll call them, across the whole company that started to get into some of these sustainability issues. We went and looked at some quality things. We sort of did bottoms-up projects across the whole company. But in the process, started teaching people the language of process efficiency and ecology and conservation in a whole bunch of different ways. And sort of created this guerrilla army that now, when we really want to go take hard looks at business process, we've got a community of people, several thousand strong now across all of Microsoft, that know the language, know how to work together, and can go affect some of these things, which includes our supply chain, oddly enough, because that's where a lot of the early work was done. And so for us, it's about having, a body of people that are trained with the right skills, and then who can go light up, thousands of things at once that all contribute towards, a better outcome in this and many other areas. One word of caution, I'll say, though, one of the things I've learned as a CIO is that I have to be careful about what goals I set for my organization. For example, if I go tell IT people to go cut costs, they'll go figure out how to cut costs. But it's usually on the wrong things. And it's usually at the short-term expense of things that are, you know, good for the company, good for our customers over some long period of time. I have the same fear in this area. If I tell them just to focus on, you know, an end goal that we might have, I see evidence that sometimes they'll go do the wrong things. And the quality and business excellence work that we've done has shown me that what we really need to do is an old classic model from IT. It's input, process, and output. And you measure that whole thing. And if you set the right kind of goals, then you'll get a great outcome. So in our case, it's eliminate first, then automate. And if you try to do it the other way around, automate first, you never get the elimination that creates the outcome that you want at the end of the day. So in all of this work that we do, whether it's supply chain or the stuff we do internally, the first thing we go look at is what can we cut out? What are the things that can just go away because of better use of bits or better use of information? It's the same stuff you've been doing for years, applied to a sort of different industry.
Well, we're out of time. Thank you so much, Rob and Tony.
Thank you.